December 26, 1996. 5:52 a.m. The phone rang at Boulder Police Dispatch, and the voice on the other end was frantic, breathless, terrified. "We have a kidnapping," Patsy Ramsey said, her words tumbling over each other. "Hurry, please." Within minutes, patrol cars screamed through the quiet, snow-dusted streets of Boulder, Colorado, converging on a massive Tudor-style mansion on 15th Street. Officers expected a ransom situation, a tense negotiation, maybe a desperate family waiting for a kidnapper's call. What they found instead would become one of the most horrifying and controversial murder cases in American history. Inside that house, chaos reigned. Patsy Ramsey, dressed and made up despite the early hour, met officers at the door. She had found a ransom note on the spiral staircase, she explained, 2.5 pages long, demanding $118,000 for the safe return of her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét's. The little girl's bedroom was empty, her bed still made. Police began a search of the sprawling 15-room mansion, opening doors, checking windows, looking for signs of forced entry or struggle. Officer Rick French even opened the door to the basement wine cellar, peered into the darkness, saw nothing immediately suspicious, and moved on. For 7 hours, that house filled with people. Family friends arrived to comfort the Ramseys. A minister came to pray. Investigators moved through rooms, taking notes, asking questions, waiting for the ransom call that never came. All the while, JonBenét's body lay in that basement wine cellar, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be found. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, John Ramsey and family friend Fleet White conducted another search of the house. This time, when John opened the wine cellar door, someone turned on the light. And there she was. JonBené Ramsey lay on the cold concrete floor, covered with a white blanket. Duct tape covered her mouth. A white cord was tied around her neck, fashioned into a crude garrote with a broken paintbrush handle attached. Her hands were bound above her head with the same white cord. John Ramsey screamed. He tore the tape from his daughter's mouth, scooped her small body into his arms, and carried her upstairs, destroying crucial forensic evidence with every step. Detective Linda Arndt checked for a pulse, found none, and felt the stiffness of rigor mortis already setting in. JonBené had been dead for hours. What began as a frantic 911 call reporting a kidnapping had transformed into something far darker, a murder investigation that would captivate and divide America for decades. And in that house that terrible morning was 9-year-old Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's older brother, who would spend the next 28 years living under a shadow of suspicion darker than anyone could imagine. Before we dive deeper into this case, make sure you're subscribed to the Case Files Collective and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most meticulously researched true crime stories, examining evidence, exploring theories, and seeking truth in cases that refuse to be forgotten. New documentaries drop every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's continue with a case that has haunted investigators, destroyed a family, and left America asking one question for nearly 3 decades: who killed JonBené Ramsey? Christmas Day, 1996. For the Ramsey family, it should have been a day of celebration, joy, and togetherness. John Ramsey, a successful businessman and CEO of Access Graphics, had built a comfortable life for his family in Boulder, Colorado. His wife, Patsy, a former beauty queen who had once been crowned Miss West Virginia, doted on their 2 children. 9-year-old Burke was a quiet, introverted boy who loved building things and playing video games. And 6-year-old JonBené was her mother's pride and joy, a little girl who loved to perform, who competed in child beauty pageants, who sparkled in front of cameras with her blonde hair, bright smile, and confident stage presence. That Christmas Day followed a familiar pattern. The family opened presents in the morning, spent time together, and in the evening attended a holiday party at the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close family friends. According to police reports and witness testimony, the Ramseys arrived at the party around 5 in the evening. JonBené played with other children. Burke stayed mostly to himself. John and Patsy mingled with friends, celebrating the holiday season. Everything seemed normal, unremarkable, ordinary. At approximately 9:30 that night, the Ramsey family left the party and drove home. JonBenet had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted from the long day of Christmas excitement. John carried his sleeping daughter from the vehicle directly to her bedroom on the second floor, laying her in bed still wearing the clothes she'd worn to the party. Patsy would later tell investigators she didn't change JonBenet into pajamas because the little girl was so deeply asleep. Burke went to his room on the second floor, just down the hall from his sister. John and Patsy retired to their bedroom on the third floor. By 10 o'clock, according to the family's account, everyone in the Ramsey house was asleep. The mansion was quiet, the lights were off, and Christmas 1996 was coming to a peaceful close. This would be the last normal night the Ramsey family would ever experience. Because sometime between 10 p.m. and 5:45 the next morning, something unthinkable happened inside that house. When Officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey home at 5:56 a.m., just 4 minutes after Patsy's frantic 911 call, he expected to secure a crime scene and begin a methodical investigation into a possible kidnapping. What he encountered instead would become a textbook example of how not to handle a criminal investigation. The mistakes made in those first critical hours would haunt this case for decades, destroying evidence, compromising forensic integrity, and making it nearly impossible to determine with certainty what actually happened inside that house. Officer French's first priority was to search the residence for any sign of JonBenet or evidence of forced entry. He moved through the sprawling mansion room by room, checking windows, examining doors, looking for anything suspicious. In JonBenét's bedroom, he found the bed seemingly undisturbed, covers pulled back as if someone had simply gotten up and walked away. He checked closets, bathrooms, storage areas. When he reached the basement, he methodically opened doors, looking into each room. He came to the wine cellar, a small windowless room with a wooden door. He turned the handle, pulled the door open, and peered inside. The room was pitch black. Officer French couldn't see anything in the darkness. He didn't step inside. He didn't turn on a light. He simply closed the door and continued his search. JonBenét's body lay on the floor of that room, less than 10 feet from where he stood. This wouldn't be the only critical mistake made that morning. As news of the kidnapping spread, the Ramsey house began filling with people. Family friends arrived to offer comfort and support. Reverend Roll Hoverstock came to pray with the family. John Ramsey called his pilot to arrange a flight to Atlanta, where the family had planned to spend the remainder of the holiday. Fleet and Priscilla White arrived and stayed with the family throughout the morning. Detective Linda Arndt arrived around 8 a.m., but she was alone, waiting for backup and the kidnapping team that had been called in. She faced an impossible situation, trying to secure what should have been a pristine crime scene while a house full of people moved freely through rooms, touched surfaces, used bathrooms, and unknowingly destroyed potential evidence. The ransom note had specified that the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m. to provide instructions for the money drop. The family gathered around the phone, waiting. 8 o'clock came and went. 9 o'clock passed. 10 o'clock arrived with no call. The silence was deafening. If this was truly a kidnapping, why weren't the kidnappers following through? Detective Arndt suggested that John Ramsey and Fleet White conduct another search of the house from top to bottom to see if anything seemed unusual or out of place. At approximately 1 p.m., more than 7 hours after that first 911 call, John Ramsey and Fleet White headed to the basement. They checked Burke's train room, where the boy kept his elaborate model train set. They examined the broken basement window, a window John claimed he had broken months earlier when he was locked out of the house. Then John walked to the wine cellar door, the same door Officer French had opened hours earlier. This time, someone flipped the light switch. And in an instant, everything changed. John Ramsey saw his daughter immediately and let out a primal scream that echoed through the house. He rushed to JonBenet, tore the duct tape from her mouth, and picked up her small body. He carried her up the basement stairs, through the house, and laid her on the floor in the front hallway. Detective Arndt checked for a pulse, already knowing what she would find. JonBenét's body was cold, stiff with rigor mortis. She had been dead for hours. By carrying JonBenét's body upstairs, John Ramsey had contaminated critical evidence. Her clothing, the positioning of her body, the crime scene itself, all of it was now compromised. The duct tape, the cords, everything John touched was now tainted with his DNA, his fibers, his fingerprints. The wine cellar where she had lain should have been sealed immediately, photographed from every angle, processed by forensic experts before anyone touched anything. Instead, it had been opened twice, walked through, and the body had been moved. Combined with the 7 hours of people moving through the house, using phones, touching surfaces, the crime scene was forensically devastated. Whatever truth existed in that basement would now be buried under layers of contamination and chaos. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We love hearing from our true crime collective community around the world. On December 27, 1996, the day after JonBenét's body was discovered, Dr. John Meyer, the Boulder County coroner, performed the autopsy that would reveal the true horror of what happened in that basement. What he documented would shock even seasoned investigators and raise questions that remain unanswered nearly 3 decades later. The autopsy report is clinical, detached, filled with medical terminology and precise measurements. But beneath the cold language lies a narrative of unimaginable cruelty and a timeline that suggests something far more disturbing than a moment of panic or a tragic accident. Dr. Meyer determined that JonBenet died from asphyxiation due to strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. In simpler terms, she was strangled to death, and she also suffered a devastating blow to her head. But the order of these injuries and the time between them would become one of the most critical and controversial aspects of this entire case. The skull fracture came first. An 8.5-inch linear crack ran across JonBenét's skull, caused by a blow delivered with tremendous force. The weapon was never definitively identified, though investigators would focus on several objects found in the house, including a flashlight, a baseball bat, and even a heavy ornamental object. Whatever struck JonBenet hit her hard enough to crack her skull and cause significant bleeding in the brain. But here is where the timeline becomes truly chilling. The medical examiner determined that this head injury, while catastrophic, did not kill JonBenet immediately. She would have been rendered unconscious instantly, her body going limp, her breathing shallow. But she was still alive. Her heart was still beating. Blood was still flowing to her brain. And she remained in this state, unconscious and dying, for somewhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours. Think about that for a moment. For up to 2 hours, JonBenet Ramsey lay somewhere in that house, gravely injured, clinging to life, while someone in that home had time to think, to decide what to do next, to act again. The strangulation came later. Someone fashioned a crude garrote using white nylon cord and a broken piece of one of Patsy's paintbrush handles from her art supplies in the basement. The cord was looped around JonBenet's neck and twisted tight using the paintbrush handle as a toggle. This was not a simple strangulation. This was a deliberate, constructed device designed to apply fatal pressure to the neck. The garrote left deep furrows in JonBenet's skin. Petechial hemorrhages, tiny burst blood vessels, appeared in her eyes and face, classic signs of asphyxiation. The strangulation killed her, cutting off oxygen to her brain and stopping her heart. Why would someone wait? If this was an accident, a moment of rage that resulted in a head blow, why not call for help immediately? Why not dial 911, rush her to a hospital, try to save her life? Instead, someone let nearly 2 hours pass while a 6-year-old child lay dying. And then, instead of seeking help, that person strangled her. This sequence of events suggests premeditation, staging, or an attempt to cover up what had already happened. It transforms this from a possible tragic accident into something far more sinister. The autopsy also revealed evidence that would spark fierce debate among investigators and experts. Dr. Meyer documented injuries to JonBenét's vaginal area, including small abrasions and a small amount of blood. Some investigators interpreted this as evidence of sexual assault on the night of the murder. Others suggested it might indicate chronic sexual abuse that had occurred over time. Still others argued it could have been an injury caused by the staging of the crime scene or even an accidental injury unrelated to the murder itself. This ambiguity would fuel years of speculation about motive and would complicate theories about who could have committed this crime. Every answer the autopsy provided seemed to generate three new questions. If someone in the house struck JonBenét's accidentally, why wait so long before acting again? If an intruder committed this crime, why spend time constructing a garrote when simpler methods existed? Why stage such an elaborate crime scene? Why write a lengthy ransom note if the victim was already dead or dying in the basement? The autopsy painted a picture not of a quick, impulsive act, but of something methodical, something that unfolded over hours, something that involved waiting while a child died and then making a conscious decision to finish what had been started. The clinical details of Dr. Meyer's report revealed a horror that went beyond the physical injuries. They revealed that someone had time. Time to think. Time to act. Time to cover their tracks. And they chose to let JonBenét die. Of all the evidence discovered in the Ramsey home that morning, nothing has been analyzed, debated, and scrutinized more intensely than the ransom note Patsy found on the staircase. At 2.5 pages long, handwritten on lined paper, it would become the most controversial piece of evidence in the entire investigation. Because the more experts examined this note, the more obvious it became that nothing about it made sense for a genuine kidnapping. Everything about it screamed staging, misdirection, and inside knowledge. The note began with the words, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully." It claimed to be from a small foreign faction and demanded exactly $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. The kidnappers warned that JonBenét was being held in a secure location and that any attempt to contact police or deviate from their instructions would result in her death. The note specified that John should withdraw the money from his account and wait for a phone call between 8 and 10 a.m. for delivery instructions. It warned against contacting the FBI or local authorities, claiming the kidnappers were monitoring the situation closely. The note ended with the ominous words, "Victory." SBTC, an acronym that has never been definitively explained. But everything about this ransom note was wrong. Real kidnapping notes are typically brief, direct, and focused on the essential information needed to facilitate the ransom exchange. This note rambled for 2.5 pages, including unnecessary details, theatrical language, and even what appeared to be quotes from popular movies. Investigators identified phrases that seemed lifted directly from films like Speed, Dirty Harry, and Ransom, movies the Ramseys owned and may have watched. Lines like, "If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies," echoed dialogue from these Hollywood thrillers. What kidnapper writes a ransom note based on movie scripts? Then there was the ransom amount itself. $118,000 was oddly specific, not a round number like 100,000 or 250,000 that kidnappers typically demand. Investigators quickly discovered that $118,000 was almost exactly the amount of John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus from his company, Access Graphics. This was not public information. This was insider knowledge that only someone with intimate access to the Ramsey family's finances would know. The note claimed to come from a small foreign faction, yet it demonstrated detailed knowledge of John's income and recent financial activity. But the most damning evidence came from the note itself, the physical paper and pen used to write it. Forensic analysis proved that the ransom note was written on a pad of paper taken from inside the Ramsey home. The notepad was found on a desk in the kitchen, with several pages torn out. The pen used to write the note was also from inside the house, a felt-tip pen that belonged to Patsy and was found in a container on the same desk. Think about what this means. Someone either broke into the house or was already inside, and instead of bringing materials to write a ransom note, they used supplies they found in the Ramsey kitchen. They sat down, possibly at the kitchen table or desk, and took the time to compose a 2.5-page letter. Even more bizarre, investigators found what appeared to be a practice ransom note in the same notepad. Someone had started writing Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, then stopped, tore out that page, and started over with just Mr. Ramsey. This suggests the writer made a mistake, reconsidered their approach, and began again. What intruder breaks into a home, decides to write a ransom note using the family's own supplies, makes a mistake, starts over, and then spends time crafting an elaborate 2.5-page letter filled with movie quotes and specific financial details? The scenario defies logic. Handwriting analysis became a crucial focus of the investigation. The FBI and multiple independent forensic document examiners studied the ransom note extensively, comparing it to handwriting samples from John, Patsy, and even Burke. John Ramsey was ruled out quickly. His handwriting bore no significant similarities to the note. Burke, at 9 years old, did not have the writing development or vocabulary to produce such a document. That left Patsy. The results were maddeningly inconclusive. Experts could not definitively say Patsy wrote the note, but they also could not rule her out. Some characteristics of the handwriting, certain letter formations, the slant, the spacing, showed similarities to Patsy's natural writing style. The language itself, phrases like attaché instead of briefcase, the formal tone mixed with dramatic flair, seemed consistent with Patsy's vocabulary and education. One expert noted that the writer appeared to be attempting to disguise their handwriting, using a mixture of print and cursive, varying pressure and letter size, as if consciously trying to make the writing look different from their normal style. This is exactly what someone staging a ransom note would do. The ransom note was not evidence of a kidnapping. It was evidence that someone wanted investigators to believe there had been a kidnapping. It was misdirection, a red herring designed to point police away from the truth. And that truth was becoming increasingly clear to investigators. Whatever happened to JonBenét's Ramsey happened inside that house, and someone in that house knew exactly what occurred. If you're finding this investigation as compelling as we are, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. The Case Files Collective brings you deep dives into the most complex true crime cases, and we have so much more coming. Make sure you don't miss it. Within 48 hours of discovering JonBenét's body, the Boulder Police Department began focusing their investigation almost exclusively on the Ramsey family. Not a mysterious intruder. Not a small foreign faction. The family themselves. And as investigators dug deeper, as they examined the evidence and the timeline, a theory began to emerge that would divide America and destroy what remained of the Ramsey family. It was a theory so disturbing, so unthinkable, that many people refused to believe it could be true. But the evidence kept pointing in one direction, toward the one person in that house no one wanted to suspect, 9-year-old Burke Ramsey. The theory centered on a bowl of pineapple. When investigators processed the kitchen crime scene, they found a white bowl on the table containing chunks of fresh pineapple and a spoon. The bowl was dusted for fingerprints, and the results showed prints from Burke Ramsey. When JonBenét's autopsy was performed, Dr. Meyer found undigested pineapple in her stomach. Based on the digestion timeline, she had eaten the pineapple shortly before her death. When investigators asked Patsy about the pineapple, she said she didn't prepare it and didn't remember JonBenet eating any that night. John gave the same answer. Burke, when initially questioned, said he didn't remember anything about pineapple either. Here's where the theory takes shape. After the family returned home from the Christmas party, what if Burke stayed up, went to the kitchen, and fixed himself a bowl of pineapple? What if JonBenet woke up and came downstairs? Maybe she was hungry. Maybe she saw him eating and wanted some too. What if JonBenet reached for Burke's pineapple? What if an argument started, the kind of argument siblings have, usually meaningless, usually forgotten within minutes? But this time, something went wrong. Investigators focused on a flashlight found on the kitchen counter. It was a heavy Maglite-style flashlight, metal, substantial. No fingerprints were found on it, which was immediately suspicious. If the family had used it that night, someone's prints should have been on it. The absence of prints suggested it had been wiped clean. Could Burke have struck JonBenet with that flashlight in a moment of anger? The medical examiner's findings supported the possibility. The blow to JonBenét's head required significant force, but not superhuman strength. A 9-year-old boy, especially one swinging a heavy metal object, could absolutely generate enough force to cause that skull fracture. This is where the theory becomes truly dark. When John and Patsy discovered what had happened, they faced an impossible situation. Their daughter was gravely injured, possibly dying. Their son had struck her. If they called 911, Burke would be taken away. The family would be destroyed. So according to this theory, they made a decision that would haunt them forever. They would stage a cover-up. Patsy wrote the ransom note, deliberately making it long and theatrical to mislead investigators. While Patsy wrote the note, John dealt with JonBenet. She was still alive but unconscious. They couldn't call for help now. So John fashioned the garrote and strangled his daughter, staging it to look like a murder by an intruder. Burke was sent back to bed, told never to speak about what happened. The grand jury that investigated this case voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child abuse resulting in death and being accessories to a crime. The language was clear: the grand jury believed someone in that house killed JonBenet, and they believed the parents helped cover it up. District Attorney Alex Hunter refused to sign the indictment, citing insufficient evidence. No charges were filed. What time is it where you are right now? Let us know in the comments. While the Boulder Police Department built their case against the Ramsey family, another piece of evidence lurked in the background, evidence that would eventually turn the entire investigation on its head. It was evidence that couldn't be explained away by theories about staging or cover-ups. It was evidence that pointed definitively away from the family and toward someone else entirely. That evidence was DNA, and it would become the most controversial and debated aspect of this entire case. In 1997, during the initial forensic analysis of JonBenét's clothing, investigators found DNA from an unknown male on her underwear. The DNA came from a mixture of blood, JonBenét's blood mixed with blood from someone else, found in the crotch area of the underwear she was wearing when her body was discovered. This DNA was run through every available database. It didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family. It didn't match any family friends who had been in the house. It didn't match anyone in the Cody's database, the FBI's national DNA database of convicted offenders. The DNA belonged to an unknown male, and no one could identify him. For years, this DNA evidence was downplayed by investigators who believed the family was responsible. They suggested it might be contamination from the manufacturing process, that underwear often contains trace DNA from factory workers who handled the garments during production. But in 2003, investigators found additional DNA evidence that was harder to dismiss. Using newer, more sensitive testing methods, forensic scientists discovered DNA on the waistband of JonBenét's long underwear, the pants she wore over her regular underwear. That DNA also belonged to an unknown male, and the profile appeared to match the DNA found on the underwear years earlier. The presence of this DNA in two separate locations, on two different articles of clothing worn by JonBenet on the night she died, made the contamination theory much less plausible. If this was just random factory contamination, what were the odds that DNA from the same unknown male would appear on both the underwear and the long underwear? The more logical explanation was that someone handled JonBenet while she was wearing these clothes, someone who left behind trace amounts of DNA through touch or other contact. And that someone was not a member of the Ramsey family. In 2008, the Boulder District Attorney's Office took an unprecedented step. District Attorney Mary Lacey, who had reopened the investigation and ordered new DNA testing using the most advanced technology available, sent a letter to the Ramsey family officially exonerating them. The letter stated clearly and unequivocally that the presence of male DNA on two separate items of clothing worn by the victim at the time of the murder made it clear that an unknown male handled these items, and there was no innocent explanation for the DNA's presence. Lacey apologized to the Ramsey family for the years of suspicion they had endured and acknowledged that the investigation had failed them. But the DNA evidence was not as conclusive as District Attorney Lacey's letter suggested, and many investigators disagreed strongly with the decision to exonerate the family. The DNA samples were extremely small, what forensic experts call trace DNA or touch DNA. This type of DNA can be transferred through indirect contact. If someone at a clothing manufacturing facility touched the underwear, their DNA could have been deposited and remained there through multiple washings. Critics also pointed out that the DNA from the underwear and the DNA from the long underwear, while similar, were not perfect matches across all tested markers. Some experts questioned whether the samples actually came from the same source. Most importantly, no other evidence of an intruder was found. No footprints in the snow outside the house, though it's worth noting that snow had melted in patches and wasn't comprehensive coverage. No fibers from an intruder's clothing. No hair from an unknown person except for one unidentified hair that was too degraded for testing. The only physical evidence suggesting someone outside the family was involved was this trace DNA. If an intruder broke into the Ramsey home that night, subdued a 6-year-old girl, assaulted her, struck her on the head, strangled her with a garrote, and spent time staging an elaborate crime scene, it seemed remarkable that they would leave behind only microscopic amounts of DNA and nothing else. Despite the controversy surrounding the DNA evidence, it gave supporters of the intruder theory something concrete to point to. Lou Smith, a legendary Colorado detective who worked on the case and became convinced of the family's innocence, believed the DNA proved an outsider committed the murder. Smith examined every aspect of the crime scene and developed an alternative theory. He believed an intruder entered the house earlier in the day or evening, possibly while the family was at the Christmas party, and hid inside waiting for everyone to fall asleep. The intruder wrote the ransom note while waiting, using materials found in the house. After the family went to bed, the intruder took JonBenét's from her room, assaulted her, killed her, and escaped through the basement window. Lou Smith continued working on this case until his death from cancer in 2010, convinced that the Ramsey family was innocent and that the real killer was still out there. His work identified several potential suspects, individuals who had some connection to the Ramsey family or who had histories of sexual offenses against children. None of these leads resulted in an arrest, but Smith's daughter continues his work today, pushing for further DNA testing and investigation. The DNA evidence represents the greatest mystery in this case. It either proves the Ramseys are innocent, or it's a red herring, an unfortunate contamination that has derailed the investigation for decades. The truth remains locked in those microscopic genetic markers, waiting for technology or investigation to finally provide an answer. The 911 call Patsy Ramsey made at 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996, lasted approximately 55 seconds. Patsy's voice was frantic, breathless, panicked. She told the dispatcher there was a kidnapping, that a ransom note had been found, that her daughter was gone. The dispatcher tried to keep Patsy on the line, asking questions, gathering information, but Patsy said she had to go, she had to call other people. The call officially ended when Patsy hung up the phone. But according to investigators who later enhanced the audio recording, the phone didn't immediately disconnect. In those final few seconds after Patsy believed she had ended the call, the enhanced audio allegedly captured voices in the background. The Boulder Police Department brought in audio experts to analyze these final moments, using specialized equipment to amplify and clarify the sounds. What they claimed to hear would become one of the most explosive and controversial pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. According to the enhanced recording, 3 distinct voices could be heard, a male voice identified as John Ramsey, a female voice identified as Patsy Ramsey, and a child's voice identified as Burke Ramsey. The voices were difficult to distinguish, overlapping and muffled, but investigators believed they could make out fragments of conversation. Burke's voice allegedly said, "What did you find?" John's voice said something that sounded like, "We're not speaking to you." Patsy's voice, which had been frantic and panicked during the 911 call itself, now sounded different, calmer, almost angry. The exact words remained disputed, with different experts hearing different phrases, but the presence of Burke's voice was the critical revelation. This was significant, explosive even, because the Ramseys had told police that Burke was asleep during the 911 call and didn't wake until later that morning. John said he had gotten Burke up after police arrived and taken him to the White family's house to get him away from the chaos. Patsy confirmed that Burke slept through the initial panic and discovery of the ransom note. But if Burke was awake and present during that 911 call, if he was standing there asking, "What did you find?" then why would his parents lie about it? What were they hiding? What did Burke know that his parents didn't want police to discover? For 20 years, Burke Ramsey never publicly addressed this enhanced 911 recording. He never explained why his voice might be on that tape when he was supposedly asleep. He never clarified what he might have seen or heard that morning. The enhanced audio became a cornerstone of the theory that Burke was involved in his sister's death and that his parents were covering for him. If Burke was awake, if he was present, if he was asking questions, then the entire timeline the family provided to police might be a carefully constructed lie designed to protect their son from suspicion. The mystery of those final seconds of the 911 call haunted investigators and fueled endless speculation. What did Burke find? What were his parents not speaking to him about? Why would they claim he was asleep if he clearly wasn't? These questions remained unanswered for decades, adding another layer of deception and secrecy to a case already drowning in both. The enhanced 911 recording represented either proof of a cover-up or misinterpreted background noise, depending on who you asked. But one thing was certain. Burke Ramsey's silence about those crucial moments only made people more suspicious of what really happened in that house on the morning JonBenét's body was discovered. If you believe Burke's story or if you think there's more he's not telling us, drop your thoughts in the comments below. This case has divided people for decades, and we want to hear what you think. Is Burke innocent, or is there truth to the theories that have followed him for 28 years? After that terrible December morning in 1996, Burke Ramsey essentially vanished from public life. While his sister's murder became one of the most sensationalized cases in American history, plastered across tabloid covers, dissected on television shows, debated endlessly on the emerging internet, Burke retreated into shadows so deep that most people forgot he existed at all. He was 9 years old when JonBenet died, a child himself, traumatized by the loss of his sister and the complete destruction of his family. And for the next 20 years, he would remain almost completely silent about what happened that night. Burke's parents made the decision early on to shield him from the media firestorm. John and Patsy hired attorneys immediately, not just for themselves but for Burke as well. They refused to allow Boulder police to interview Burke extensively, agreeing only to limited questioning with their lawyers present. When Burke did speak to investigators in those early days, his answers were vague, his memories apparently fragmented. He said he had been asleep. He didn't hear anything unusual. He didn't know what happened to his sister. He woke up that morning to chaos and confusion, and his father took him to a friend's house. Patsy Ramsey became fiercely protective of Burke, determined that he would not be consumed by the media circus that had engulfed the family. She and John moved Burke away from Boulder, away from the mansion where JonBenet died, away from the friends and community that had turned against them. Burke attended private schools where his identity was carefully guarded. He used different names at times to avoid recognition. He stayed off social media before social media even became ubiquitous. He built walls around himself, physical and emotional, that kept the world at a distance. While Burke hid from the spotlight, the world developed its own narrative about him. Internet sleuths and armchair detectives obsessed over every scrap of information they could find. They analyzed footage from a CNN interview Burke did when he was 11, 2 years after the murder, studying his body language, his facial expressions, his tone of voice, looking for signs of guilt or deception. They scrutinized childhood photos, looking for evidence of tension between Burke and JonBenet. They created elaborate theories posted on forums and websites, theories that painted Burke as a disturbed child capable of horrific violence. The theories became increasingly dark and invasive. Some claimed Burke had a history of violent behavior, citing unverified stories about him hitting JonBenét's with a golf club years before her death, an incident Patsy had mentioned in interviews but characterized as an accident. Others suggested Burke had psychological issues that his parents covered up. Still others created detailed scenarios of what they believed happened that night, complete with timelines and motives, all pointing to Burke as the killer. None of these theories were based on actual evidence. They were speculation built on speculation, conspiracy built on conspiracy. But they spread and multiplied, and Burke's silence was interpreted as proof of guilt. In 2006, Patsy Ramsey died of ovarian cancer at the age of 49. She had fought the disease twice before, but this time it took her. Patsy died without ever seeing justice for JonBenét's and without ever escaping the cloud of suspicion that hung over her for a decade. She maintained her innocence until her final breath, insisting that an intruder killed her daughter and that the real killer was still out there. For Burke, losing his mother meant losing his fiercest protector, the person who had dedicated the last 10 years of her life to shielding him from accusations and attacks. Burke continued his life in obscurity. He graduated from college, earned a degree in computer technology, and found work in the information technology field. He lived quietly, kept to himself, maintained virtually no public presence. Friends who knew him described him as intelligent, introverted, and deeply scarred by his childhood trauma. He dated occasionally but struggled with relationships, burdened by a past he could never escape. Every person he met, every potential friend or romantic partner, eventually discovered who he was and what he was associated with. Some believed him innocent. Others looked at him with suspicion. All of them saw him through the lens of his sister's murder. Then in 2016, CBS announced a documentary titled The Case of JonBenét's Ramsey. The documentary featured a panel of experts who would review all available evidence and present their conclusions about who killed JonBenét's. Burke knew what was coming. He had lived through decades of accusations. But this was different. This was a major television network presenting a primetime documentary that would reach millions of viewers. And when the documentary aired, it did exactly what Burke feared. The experts on the panel, including former FBI profilers and veteran investigators, concluded that Burke Ramsey was the most probable perpetrator of his sister's murder and that his parents had staged an elaborate cover-up to protect him. Burke watched the documentary that accused him directly of murder. He watched experts analyze evidence, recreate the crime, and conclude that he, at 9 years old, had killed his sister and gotten away with it. 3 weeks later, Burke Ramsey filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS, the production company, and the individual experts who appeared in the film. The lawsuit claimed the documentary falsely accused him of murder, destroyed his reputation, and caused immense emotional distress. The case would eventually settle in 2019 for an undisclosed amount. But more importantly, Burke made another decision. After 20 years of silence, after 2 decades of hiding and hoping the accusations would fade, Burke Ramsey decided it was time to speak. It was time to tell his side of the story. It was time to defend himself and his family against the theories that had destroyed their lives. And so Burke agreed to sit down for his first public interview in 20 years, an interview that would shock America and reignite the debate about what really happened to JonBenét's Ramsey. September 2016. After 20 years of silence, after 2 decades of living in the shadows while the world debated his guilt or innocence, Burke Ramsey walked into a television studio and sat down across from Dr. Phil McGraw. The interview would air in 3 parts over 3 days, and America watched, captivated, as the man who had been a 9-year-old boy on the night his sister died finally spoke about the murder that had defined and destroyed his life. This was the moment everyone had waited for, the moment Burke would either clear his name or confirm the suspicions that had followed him for nearly 3 decades. Dr. Phil didn't waste time with pleasantries or gentle warm-up questions. He addressed the accusation directly, immediately, the way everyone watching wanted him to. "There have been many people who have said you killed your sister," Dr. Phil stated, looking Burke in the eye. "What do you say about that?" Burke shifted in his seat, smiled nervously, a smile that would become one of the most analyzed and debated aspects of the entire interview, and responded. "I know people think I did it," he said. "That people think my parents did it. I know that we were cleared. It's hard to miss the accusations being thrown around." Then he said the words clearly and directly, "I did not kill JonBenet." Burke's demeanor during the interview became almost as controversial as his words. He smiled frequently, even when discussing serious or tragic aspects of the case. When talking about finding out his sister was dead, he smiled. When addressing accusations of murder, he smiled. Viewers found this unsettling, interpreting it as evidence of guilt, sociopathy, or a disturbing lack of empathy. Mental health experts and body language analysts rushed to Burke's defense, explaining that nervous smiling is a common response to extreme stress and discomfort, especially for someone who has lived with social anxiety and trauma for decades. Burke himself acknowledged that he found the interview incredibly difficult and that he felt deeply uncomfortable discussing these painful memories in front of cameras and millions of viewers. Dr. Phil pressed Burke on specific evidence, starting with the night of December 25. What did Burke remember? Burke described coming home from the Christmas party, JonBenet asleep or appearing to be asleep in the car. He said he stayed up for a while after everyone went to bed, playing with a toy he had gotten for Christmas. He recalled being downstairs, though he couldn't remember exactly what he was doing or for how long. His memory of those late-night hours was fragmented, unclear, the way childhood memories often are, especially memories surrounding trauma. When his parents woke him in the morning and told him JonBenet was missing, Burke said he didn't fully understand what was happening. His father took him to the White family's house while police investigated. He didn't learn that his sister had been killed until later that day, and even then, the reality didn't fully sink in. He was 9 years old, and the concept of death, especially the violent death of his sister, was beyond his ability to process. Dr. Phil brought up the enhanced 911 recording, the voices heard after Patsy supposedly hung up the phone, the question Burke allegedly asked, "What did you find?" This was one of the most damaging pieces of evidence against Burke, proof that he had been awake during the call when his parents claimed he was asleep. Burke's response was careful but significant. He admitted he might have been awake and might have spoken, though he didn't specifically remember it. He said if he was awake, he probably sensed something was wrong and got up to see what was happening. This admission contradicted his parents' original statements, but Burke explained that after 20 years, his memory of those specific moments was incomplete and fragmented. He couldn't say with certainty exactly when he woke up or what he heard. On the subject of the pineapple, the bowl with his fingerprints that had become central to theories about his guilt, Burke confirmed that he had gotten himself a snack when they got home that night. He couldn't remember if JonBenet was with him or if she ate any. He characterized it as an insignificant detail, something he simply didn't remember clearly because nothing about that moment seemed important at the time. It was just a normal late-night snack, the kind of thing kids do without thinking about it. He had no memory of an argument, no memory of conflict, no memory of anything unusual happening in the kitchen. Dr. Phil asked Burke directly about his relationship with JonBenet. Were they close? Did they fight? Burke described a typical sibling relationship. Sometimes they got along great, played together, enjoyed each other's company. Sometimes they argued about toys or space or the things siblings always argue about. But nothing, he insisted, that would ever lead to violence. He loved his sister. The idea that he could have harmed her, let alone killed her in such a brutal way, was absurd to him. Burke addressed the years of silence, explaining that his parents, particularly his mother before her death, wanted to protect him from the media circus and the vicious accusations. They believed the best way to do that was to keep him completely out of the spotlight, to let him live as normal a life as possible away from cameras and reporters. Burke said he agreed with that decision for many years. He thought if he stayed quiet, if he didn't engage with the theories and accusations, eventually people would lose interest and move on. But it didn't work that way. His silence was interpreted as guilt. People assumed he was hiding something, that he refused to speak because he couldn't defend himself without lying. When the CBS documentary aired in 2016, presenting experts who concluded Burke was the killer, he realized his silence had become a weapon used against him. He decided he had to speak, had to defend himself and his family's name, had to look America in the eye and tell the truth. He did not kill his sister. His parents did not stage a cover-up. An intruder murdered JonBenét's, and that person has never been caught. The interview was revealing, emotional, and deeply uncomfortable to watch. But it didn't end the speculation. Skeptics pointed to Burke's effect, his nervous smiling, his difficulty remembering certain details, his admission about being awake during the 911 call. They saw a man who had lived with a terrible secret for 28 years, a man whose story had cracks and inconsistencies. Supporters argued that Burke was simply a traumatized individual who had every right to protect his privacy and who was now bravely confronting decades of false accusations. They saw a man telling the truth, a man who had been victimized twice, first by losing his sister and then by being blamed for her death. The court of public opinion remained divided. Some believed Burke completely. Others remained convinced of his guilt. The interview changed some minds and reinforced others. But one thing became clear, Burke Ramsey had finally broken his silence, and America would have to decide for themselves whether they believed him. The case of JonBenét's Ramsey remains officially unsolved. The Boulder Police Department continues to receive tips and investigate new leads. In recent years, advancements in DNA technology, specifically genetic genealogy, the same technology that identified the Golden State Killer, could potentially be applied to the unknown male DNA found in this case. John Ramsey has advocated publicly for this advanced testing, urging Boulder police to allow outside laboratories to run the DNA through genealogical databases to potentially identify a family tree that could lead to the killer. Burke Ramsey has returned to his private life. After his interview and his lawsuit settlement, he has not given further public statements. He has made it clear that he has said what he needed to say. He knows people will continue to speculate, continue to debate, continue to accuse. But he also knows he told the truth, and for Burke, that has to be enough. JonBenét's Ramsey was 6 years old when she died. She would be 34 years old today. Whoever killed her has lived with that secret for 28 years. Whether that person is still alive, whether they will ever be caught, whether justice will ever be served, these are questions that only time can answer. But the case remains open, the evidence still exists, and somewhere, perhaps, there is someone who knows the truth. If this investigation intrigued you, make sure you're subscribed to the Case Files Collective for more in-depth true crime documentaries. Hit that like button and drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Burke's interview revealed the truth? Do you believe the intruder theory? Or do you think there are still pieces of this puzzle we haven't uncovered? Let us know what you think. These aren't just stories for entertainment. These are real people, real families, and real tragedies that deserve our respect and our continued pursuit of truth. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop questioning.